Morning, everybody. This Gauteng weather, I hope you've all got a nice cup of tea, cup of coffee. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all. We are waiting for more participants as they come in. I thought it for the purposes of time and for those of you who have joined to say welcome and thank you. Thank you ever so much for coming through in this beginning to be bitterly cold August morning, and the beginning of an event and a month that I think, as we know, is very significant for our country and I think in general for the world. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Valour Rankin. I'm one of the founders of Valour, and mine is but a simple task, and that is to introduce the hostess with the mostess, that's Refillway, but also to introduce in a small way. I'll let the bio be managed very specifically by Refillway, but also to introduce a good friend, somebody I'm really excited to hear and thought appropriate for one of our first events, Valour in terms of a large event in this sense. CJ, who I worked with, a colleague. I can't say enough about her. She's a very, very kind-hearted person. And I think it's just amazing that she could be here. Thank you very much, CJ. So, I thought just also, again, for the purposes of time, it might be appropriate just to hand over directly to Refillway, who will do the official welcomes. But once again, I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming in and for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. And thank you everyone for joining on such, I think it's like a gloomy Saturday Joburg morning, but thank you for making the effort to get up and join us on this great event. So to welcome or to introduce rather our speaker today, Mrs. Cheryl-Jane Kujenga, fondly known as CJ. Thank you, CJ, for joining us this morning. So just a small introduction. CJ is a seasoned financial professional with 22 years of experience. 13 of those has been in senior and executive leadership roles as a partner at EY, and more recently, interim CEO and group CFO at Adcorp Holdings Limited. Her core expertise relates to strategy development, and deployment, financial leadership, and operations management. She's passionate about being an active corporate citizen who makes an impact to society and organizations around her, and developing strong, diverse teams. More recently, CJ completed her Executive MBA with UCT and graduated with distinctions. Hey. Her thesis explored the reasons for the low number of women who transition from senior management to executive leadership roles in South Africa's largest corporates. The paper explored the following research questions: what role do societal constructs play in the phenomenon? And what is the felt experience of women in executive leadership roles? Her focus now is on sharing her findings with the men and women who have the influence and authority to make decisions regarding appointment of executives. And today she will be sharing some of those insights with us. So we're very excited to have CJ. Everybody, please listen. It's going to be a great presentation. CJ, please take it away.
Thank you, Refillway, and thank you, Vic. Up front, I just need to say I've got a bit of a sore throat. It is not COVID related, or at least I hope it isn't. But you'll just bear with me as if I need to just take a short break here and there.
Not a problem.
Thanks. So, morning, everyone. First of all, let me start by saying it's a real privilege to be talking to you. And I hope that you each walk away with some food for thought, an added perspective that you may or may not agree with, but that adds depth to the lens through which you see the world. because unfortunately the matters related to increasing gender diversity in the corporate world are just not binary. And so I trust that you each take it upon yourselves to invite multiple perspectives. And I'm looking forward to engaging with you on this very important topic over the next hour or so. So as Refilwe has said, in 2017, I wrote my thesis on the topic of women in C-suite roles in South Africa's largest corporates. And my focus was specifically on the lack of women at these levels. My curiosity stemmed from the fact that despite the fact that workplaces are becoming more gender friendly, that we're seeing more women in middle and senior management roles, and that the benefits that having women in organizations brings to the bottom line of those organizations is the fact that it's well documented. I was still not seeing enough women of senior enough levels to be sitting at the table where organizational decisions are truly made. So my research included interviewing a number of women who had made it into these roles to understand the societal constructs that they had faced and their felt experience. I also leveraged on my own journey and insights and used these insights and the process to just learn and grow and reflect. And as Refilwe has pointed out, one of the things that I've really tried to do since then is to raise awareness and exposure about some of my findings. Now, I'm a firm believer in walking a journey where you bring the best of yourself to any situation. As a girl growing up, I was told that I could be or do anything that I wanted to be, as long as I set my mind to it and I was willing to work hard for it. But my mother also used to caution me that everyone you meet in life will categorize you, and they put you in a box. And they will determine for themselves which box you fit in and what size that box will be. Some people will have large boxes that allow you to grow and to blossom. Some will have small ones that confine and restrict you. And who you truly are. You'll eventually get to understand each person's box, because as you outgrow it, they become uncomfortable. And either they will readjust to your growth, or their season in your life comes to an end. The reality is that doesn't matter, because there's very little you can do to change those boxes. They're informed by factors such as exposure, upbringing, religion, gender assumptions, societal norms, etc. But what you can focus on is the box that you create for yourself. So today I want to use the analogy of the box to help us to consider and become more aware of some of the factors that have an impact on the progression of women. I want to discuss some aspects of the box that we create for women. And the box and the areas that I want to touch on today have four sides to it. The first is what I call the natural order, and I'll unpack this shortly. The next is opting out. The third area that I'll touch on is how women are perceived as leaders. And the fourth one, and probably the most significant one, is the willingness by those who have the power to make a change, to actually truly make a change in terms of how women are perceived in the workplace. I think right up front, it's important to state what this discussion today is not about. It's not a discussion that undermines the decisions made by many women and men to stay at home and look after their children. I have a lot of respect for these women. It is their choice, and they have been brave enough to make it. Today, my focus is on those women who want a career and who want to progress that career to senior and executive leadership. Today is also heavily biased towards women. Men have to be part of these conversations. Factors such as the way we bring up our sons and attitudes towards feminine and masculine attributes have to be analyzed in additional forums to the one that we're having today. So Vic, I really hope that this is not the only Women's Day forum that Value Add is having.
Gotcha.
But I'll touch, I'll get right into the four areas, and I'll start with the natural order. So as part of my thesis, I asked the question, what is woman? To various men and women. And it's a fairly generic question, as you can see. I didn't ask anyone to consider whether that role was at home or at work. And in fact, considering that most of the conversations I was having were taking place in the work environment, I expected that the responses would be in relation to women at work and women in leadership. The responses that I received were thought-provoking because they placed the primary source of a woman's influence and transformative ability as being in the home. The reality is, African society, like many others, upholds the value that a woman brings to the home through being the primary caregiver to the children and elderly, as well as to housekeeping. As a Shona girl, it was not uncommon for me to be scolded or chastised for being lazy with things like which translates to you will be returned by your in-laws, which has an underlying assumption, right? I will be beholden to my in-laws. I will have to have in-laws. And our hen parties were filled with advice on how to look after the home, our family, your man. And I recall a distinctly heated debate that we had with a group of fellow female CA trainees regarding whether a slightly older female counterpart should accept the benefits that she'd been offered in her new job that would enable her to buy a house. Years for male peers, and more importantly at the time, her boyfriend could afford to do so. It felt taboo to a number of us. And it seemed a sure way to guarantee never getting married. Now, in the book Sapiens, the author outlines how our social reality is a mutual construct that is cemented by what he calls habitualization. Therefore, when we frequently repeat an action, it becomes so ingrained and cast into a pattern. And over time, this forms a general source of knowledge and a store that is institutionalized by society to the extent that future generations experience this as objective socialization. I.e., we are what we are because of generations and generations of things being normalized. So, men have dominated the organizational and political leadership domain for so long that so-called leadership characteristics are usually based on masculine attributes. And this is exacerbated by the fact that there's such a low number of women in these roles that we're not enough to change the dominant stereotype. So without the critical mass of women to change the assumption that leadership style is gender situated and not personality situated, it becomes very difficult to change the status quo. My own reflection is that this construct results in the cognitive challenge of seeing women as leaders in organizations. There's just no narrative for it. There's no mental model to help us to navigate it and allow mental associations to be made of women as more than just the primary caregivers in the family and in the home. So this is perpetuated by the fact that women have been anonymized so much that no one even notices when our voice is not sought or heard. Human identity is subconsciously aligned with male, and often white male, if I have to be honest, identity. Give some thought to concepts that are considered gender neutral and ask yourself whether they truly equalize the playing field between women and men. So as an example, until fairly recently, when you typed in words like doctor, engineer, CEO into your iPhone, it would automatically bring up the male emoji. Now, fortunately, there's been quite a public outcry about it, and Apple has rectified that. Caroline Criado Perez wrote a book called Invisible Women. And that book is about the absence of female-specific data that makes it impossible to design a world that works for women. She argues that the continued definition of women predominantly by their relationship to men, so as wives, as daughters, as sisters, mothers, allows men to view women as a subtype of men, rather than as an autonomous human being with their own desires, goals, and specific needs. Her book highlights the woman-sized gap that has been created by society's view of women in a fairly tunnel-visioned manner. So, for example, why are men only referred to as Mr.? What makes it so important for us to know the age and or marital status of a woman by using the titles Miss, Mrs., or Ms.? In fact, when a woman is seen to promote diversity, she's actually penalized for it and labeled quite negatively. So I pose the question to this group: how natural is the natural order? And I know this makes a number of us uncomfortable, but I leave you with this thought, especially for those of you with daughters. You're educating your daughters to one day live up to their fullest of potentials. Can they genuinely do that with the natural order in its current status? Now, the next aspect of the box that I touched on is what I call opting out. How many women opt out when in fact they should be leaning in? In my late 20s, I was part of a group of young Christian women that were exploring how best we could become fit biblical wives. One of the topics for discussion was the type of career you chose. The premise was that in order to become a fit biblical wife, one needed to make sure that the career did not take up too much time, so that when you become a mother, you will have time for your children. And that it also enabled the husband to take up their true role as the head of the house. Now, my dilemma was that I actually really loved my job. I was at such a great point in my career. I was about to be made partner at a Big Four firm, and I could not reconcile a God who opened these doors for me and gave me this gift, but at the same time wanted me to become smaller so that I would make whatever husband eventually came on the scene more comfortable. So, and this is the theme that I saw coming through quite clearly in all the women I spoke to. This issue of self-agency, a willingness to take a risk, and a strong sense of self-belief were consistent characteristics in the women that I interviewed. And this manifested in various ways, such as actively seeking to work in organizations and with CEOs and bosses that they liked, and with whom they felt that they had a values alignment. It also translated into the women making intentional, social, and sometimes unconventional decisions that enabled them to grow in their careers. The reality, though, is that the presence of strong, understanding support structures is an important enabler for women's success. This includes, in many cases, having a husband or a partner who understands the woman's drive and ambition and fully supports it. The reality is the division of childcare and housework is still hugely lopsided towards women. Workplace policies have not made any significant strides to change the dynamic. So you see, for example, that the average company allows a woman 3 to 4 months maternity leave, but it allows 2 weeks paternity leave. Now, I can only imagine a situation and what a difference it would make if men also had 3 to 4 months paternity leave. Because you could play a bit of tag team, couldn't you? So you take 3 to 4 months to look after the child, and when you go back to work, your husband takes another 3 to 4 months to look after the child, giving you peace of mind to fully engage with your career. Now, this aligns with the advice of Sheryl Sandberg, who wrote the book Lean In, who calls on women to make their partners equal participants in aspects of child rearing and housekeeping. Having said that, the assumption that households are made up of heterosexual married couples is becoming outdated. And I'm an example of this. I am a single mother by choice, and therefore I don't have the option of a partner who can co-parent with me. Now, Sandberg admitted her oversight years later when her husband unfortunately passed away. And she's quoted as saying, "Before, I did not get it. I did not really get how hard it is to succeed at work when you are overwhelmed at home." This factor cannot be ignored in a country where more than 40% of women with children are single mothers. Now, I had a very disconcerting discussion with a senior male executive of a listed company that gave me insight to how some men view the matter of women in executive and senior leadership roles. "It can't be done," was his comment. "You know, one of us has to stay at home and run the household." There were other comments that he made, in the discussion, but in essence, his view was that I travel a lot. I have to entertain clients, and I can be gone for days. She needs to be at home to look after the kids and the household. And my observation, not said by him, was that he feels his children need to spend more time with their mother than with him. And I'd have loved to have pushed him a bit more to ask him how he feels he would structure his life differently if he prioritized both work and time with his kids. And it's worth noting that his wife holds an MBA. I asked him how his views translate to the women that he works with and the opportunities that he affords them. And he felt that he was extremely fair to them. But it's interesting to note that at the time that we had this conversation, his was another company on the JSE that did not have a single female executive on the senior team. Now, this conversation is an illustration of the strong patriarchy that underpins the views of some men in decision-making roles. It is a chicken and egg dilemma. Self-agency allows for one to make intentional decisions that may differ from societal norms, but one needs to have the ability to be self-sufficient to make those choices. So unfortunately, too many women opt out, either by making themselves smaller or actually just leaving the workplace and leaving potentially fulfilling careers before they have a chance to make an impact. The need for material means is an important aspect of self-agency. In 1929, Virginia Woolf wrote an account of the challenges faced by female authors of the time in her book, A Room of One's Own. In it, she highlights this tension brought about by women being the child bearers and the need for women to be financially independent in order to fulfill their careers and meet their aspirations. And I quote from a portion of her book, which I found particularly profound. And she says, "Making a fortune and bearing 13 children, no human could stand it. Consider the facts. First, there are 9 months before the child is born. Then the baby is born. Then there are 3 or 4 months spent in feeding the baby. After the baby is fed, there are certainly 5 years spent in playing with the baby. You cannot, it seems, let children run around the streets. People who've seen them running wild in Russia say that it is a sight and not a pleasant one. People say too that human nature takes its shape in the years between 1 and 5. Therefore, if Mrs. Seton and her like had gone into business at the age of 15, there would have been, and this is the snag in the argument, no Mary. What, I asked, did Mary think of that? Now, I think in her own way, Woolf eloquently summarizes this dilemma that still exists today. Can a woman who is a mother engage in a successful career and still provide the caregiving and nurturing her children need? Can a man provide that in the woman's place? Or are we too habitualized that we do not believe this to be the case? Is the primary role of a woman that of childbearing? And if she does not have any children, if there are no Marys that she gives birth to, then has she failed society? I don't have answers to these questions. However, we cannot ignore the long-held subconscious association of what we believe the role of women is on how we view female leaders. What I do know is that the more women that opt out in various ways, the less women there are with a room of their own and the means to make the choices that enable them to grow in their careers. And the harder it becomes to break this vicious cycle. This takes me to the third aspect of the box that I'm going to touch on today, which is how women are perceived as leaders. Now, the psychology of prejudice towards female leaders stems from this instant gender categorization and association of women with what are seen as more communal qualities and men as being seen as having authority and agency. And the advantage that this has on men is that the starting assumption is that they can lead. So once a man is viewed as a leader, the qualities associated with leadership are further ascribed to him, giving him an additional edge in the competition for leadership roles. No such bolstering occurs for women. And this is further worsened by the concept of what's called the double bind. So a double bind is a behavioral norm that creates a situation where a person cannot win no matter what she does. So when a woman displays characteristics that are viewed as gender typical, she experiences this femininity competency double bind judgment because she's not tough enough. She's not firm enough, and she's certainly not loud enough to be a leader. But when she displays characteristics that are seen as male, she's labeled as, oh, she's too bossy. She's not likable. And if that same woman happens to not be married, then she experiences the further prejudice of having her single status ascribed as having resulted from her leadership qualities. In fact, the existence of toughness and femininity in one personality are difficult qualities for corporate culture to reconcile and digest. I love this quote from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Teach her that if you criticize X in women, but do not criticize X in men, then you do not have a problem with X. You have a problem with women. For X, please insert words like anger, ambition, loudness, stubbornness, coldness, ruthlessness. Many entrenched organizational structures and work practices were designed to fit men's lives and situations at a time when women made up only a small portion of the workforce. One of the most shocking cases of corporate patriarchy was towards Cynthia Carroll, who was the former CEO of Anglo. And I'll read from an article that was that appeared in the UK Independent in February 2013, referencing a discussion that had taken place with the deputy chairman of the board that she was CEO of. And I'll read the last two paragraphs. Having proclaimed Carroll as a hopeless woman in the 2009 interview, he went on to suggest that it is difficult to find good female chief executives because most women are sexually frustrated. Yes, he said that. He kept digging. Men are not, because they can fall back on call girls. If you have a CEO who's sexually frustrated, she can't act properly. Now, I have no idea what this had to do with Cynthia Carroll's ability to lead Anglo at that particular point in time. Another example of the kind of prejudice Carroll faced came from a senior banker who lamented that she spent far too much time on equality issues. If you recall, one of the things I touched on earlier is the fact that when you are seen to be a proponent of gender diversity, it is actually negatively viewed, particularly in the corporate world. And this, I think, is a good segue to get into the fourth side of the box, which is the willingness by those with the power to make a difference. I believe that the single most significant factor in progressing women into senior leadership roles is that played by those who have the decision-making power to advance the careers of women to stages where there are enough women in genuine decision-making roles in organizations. A factor that is linked to the low number of women in executive leadership and in senior leadership is the way recruitment takes place at this particular level. So it's usually not an HR function. It is one that is heavily sponsored by the board and typically driven by the CEO, working closely, yes, with HR. Therefore, you need this group of people to be intentional about adding a critical mass of gender diversity to the decision-making table, particularly in senior and executive management, and not just in non-executive director roles. This perceived lack of availability of a pipeline of competent and experienced women to fill executive senior leadership roles is often used as an excuse to keep men at a disproportionate rate. Women's ambition, we know, is based on a combination of both mastery and recognition. So we've all heard about the woman who has 90% qualification to do what she does, but doesn't put her hand up for a promotion, and a man who is less qualified, but a lot more confident, puts his hand up. And mastery entails obtaining the necessary credentials and experience. And together with recognition of a woman's achievement, is important to keep their ambition alive. My strongly held view is that organizations are not giving women enough strategic and tough assignments that prepare them for executive leadership. My own experience is that women tend to be given softer opportunities that do not adequately stretch and develop their abilities. Now, I'm a mom, I've got two daughters, one aged 6, the other aged 4, and I love them with all my heart and soul. And if I'm going to be leaving them at home every day, then it has to be for something that energizes me and provides me with intellectual stimulation. I want to know that my work makes a tangible impact to the bottom line of an organization. You see, I think understanding the real reasons why women choose to stay within an organization or to leave is important in strengthening the pipeline of female leaders and female talent. It is certainly not one size fits all, but I believe that a combination of executive intentionality with high potential women, and there are many of them out there, and challenging strategic developmental experiences strengthens one's psychological contract with an organization and enables the organization to retain more female talent. Research on a phenomenon called the glass cliff indicates that women tend to be appointed to leadership positions that are associated with an increased risk of failure or criticism. Meaning may then be put to the fact that you now have a woman in leadership in an organization that is failing, and it is then maybe ascribed to the woman that this is the reason that the organization is failing. Now, I reflect on my own situation. I joined a listed company as its group CFO at a time when the company's share price had fallen to less than a third of its peak performance price, following years of declining financial results. The trust had been broken down between the executive management team and the board, as well as between the directors and the shareholders. And 2 weeks before I joined, an activist shareholder came on board. 2 days after I joined, they convened a board meeting and effectively fired half of the board. Within the first month of my being there, they exited the CEO and the COO, and I found myself at that point in time, both the group CFO and the acting COO. When I was headhunted to the role, my view was that this would be a fantastic opportunity to prove myself and be instrumental in the turnaround of a sizable listed organization. I only found out about this phenomenon of the glass ceiling much later. And finding out about it, I reflected on whether, if I'd known about it, whether it would have changed my mind. But I'll be honest, I'm grateful for getting an opportunity that would most likely have automatically been given to a man had the opportunity not, or had the organization not gone through the type of shakeup that it did. Many companies are going through uncertain times at the moment, and perhaps this glass cliff will prove to be an unwitting channel of true transformation in organizations. I want to start closing off, and I want to say this: there is a belonging problem for women in the corporate world. Concerns with diversity, equity, representativity, genuine representativity are very topical at the moment as we see movements like Black Lives Matter growing exponentially globally. And in recent years, Hollywood has come under attack in response to various people who have come up, who have said that there's just no representation in film. And so various people have come up with different tests to check whether or not films, movies have got the right type of representation. And I've chosen 3 of these tests just to share with you. The first is the Bechdel test, which asks 3 questions. Does the movie have at least 2 women in it who talk to each other about something other than a man? There's the Vita Russo test, which is more for the LGBTQ community. And it asks whether or not there is an LGBTQ character who must have a persona that is not solely determined by their sexual or sexual orientation or gender identity. And they must be inextricably tied to the plot such that their removal would have a significant effect. And the Duvernay test that says African Americans in film must have fully realized lives rather than serve as the scenery in white stories. And so I've tried to think about what the equivalent would be for a world where we start saying, okay, so now there genuinely is representation in the corporate world with enough women in the levels and the roles that they need to be in. And I've come up with the CJ test, and I'm keen to understand and hear from you whether or not you think it's realistic, whether or not it's not pushing the boundaries enough, or whether there are other things we should add to it. But I'm saying there must be at least 2 women in the executive team, or at least in senior leadership teams in the organization. The women must have decision-making authority. They must have decision-making authority. It's not just about having a token woman. There must be at least 2 women in a role other than HR or corporate affairs. Now, don't get me wrong. HR and corporate affairs are extremely important. But if you look around, they've almost become the default placeholders for women on the executive team. We must make sure that all projects of significant commercial or strategic importance must include at least 2 women whose roles are critical to the achievement of the outcome. So they're not there taking minutes or notes or making tea. They're not there just so that when you take a photo of the team, you can say they are women on the team. They're genuinely serving a purpose and are inextricably linked to the outcome. So that's what I've come up with at this point in time. I've tried to apply this to a number of organizations. I'm not yet seeing it. I know that we've got a long way to go. And I'm keen to hear from the audience about what you think. I've spoken for a long time. I'm going to hand back to Vic and Refilwe and just open up for a discussion. Thank you for obliging me.
Thank you, CJ. I mean, this was a very insightful and a great, topic and presentation. I'm very interested as well. I was going to say, let's start off the conversation with your last point, the CJ method. I think that's very interesting. What does everybody else think about this? Being 2 women, at least 2 women in executive team and having, decision-making authority. What do we think of this? I know with BBBE, for example, this has been, imposed in companies saying, you must have a certain percentage of women, but as we know, they really haven't had decision making, they're just there as a token or just, fill in the seat at the table. So what is everybody's thoughts on this? Please take it away. Oh, I'm going to point. I know a couple of people here. If you don't, I'm going to point at you. I would like to point at somebody who I know sits at executive level, Ms. Letseho Rankin. As a woman in executive, what do you have to say on this one?
I knew that you were going to do this to me, Refilwe. I actually agree with CJ. I mean, the thing is, a lot of things that she's actually mentioned, they make sense. They make a lot of sense for people like myself. The more you go up the ladder and the higher you get to that ladder, it becomes really lonely, if I may put it that way. So that seat on the table, it must be a seat that actually has a voice. It can't just be a seat where, when the pictures are taken, you just there, appearing there. So I definitely agree with what she's saying. So for me, is that those women in executive positions, they must have a voice. Otherwise, it just, I think for us, we will never be able to change the status quo if it's not like that. The one thing that I want to ask CJ though is, the support. Let's say women are at top positions like yourself, CJ. What support do you actually have from other women in the business or even in the industry? And some of the negativities that, for instance, with the CEO, the former CEO of Anglo. I know the comments were made by men, but then, the stereotypes of women as well. I mean, do we support others that are in senior roles or do we not? Yeah. That's another question, because I think we had a women event and those questions actually came forward, and most women felt like that a lot of women are not supportive of other successful women in top positions. So do we do it to ourselves, if I may put it that way, But I agree with the test. I fully agree with the test.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. So I think, and this is, I'm going to be careful because I know there are a lot of women who are trying. I know there are a lot of women who are trying to make a difference. I don't think women have taken their power. So sometimes you do see that women sit on a board, but their voice is not as impactful or as loud as it should be, because I think there's still this almost this deference to okay, but maybe I should just go with the majority position. Maybe I should rather look at what everyone else thinks. I think it's particularly challenging. It is lonely. One of the things that I certainly felt over the years is that when you're the only person in the room, you are seen as just, each time you open your mouth, it's almost like, oh no, she's a woman and she wants to push the gender position. And so it becomes increasingly difficult and you start becoming quieter. And that's why I'm almost appealing to the level below that to say, guys, don't opt out. Don't sacrifice your careers. Don't become smaller, because we need more women at these tables who think differently, who come with different strengths, so that we can have become more of a force to reckon with. But yeah, it's lonely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, thank you both for your insights. I want to pose a question. I've experienced this as a young person in corporate. I'm very ambitious. I'm very loud. I'm always challenging the status quo. And one of my thing, and actually it's funny, my current boss right now is a woman. She's a managing director. But one thing that we both agree on is that it's harder to report to a woman than it is to reporting to a man. For some reason, as a young girl, it's almost like you challenging or attacking when I go to my female boss, and the same way I would go to my male boss. The reception is very different. So I'm wondering, what could be the cause of that? Is it because as a woman in an executive level, you feel like you've had to fight, to get to this position? So now who's this little young thing coming in and challenging me, or whatever the case is? I don't know why, but I've always had it, it's always been the case that it's easier for me to report to a man than it is to a woman.
Sure.
And anybody else can take that if you had a similar experience.
This is a continuous debate amongst me and my friends, and I'm really keen to hear from everyone, because everyone's got a blind spot. So I'm always saying, no, but people who work with me don't feel that, but I don't know. I mean, when I reflect on my own career journey, I've had both really great female mentors and people women I've reported into, and I've had some really bad ones. In the same way, I've had really bad male ones and really good ones. I think part of the challenge, Refiwa, is there not enough of us. So I'll share, of the 9 years that I was a partner at EY, 8 of those, I was the only Black female partner in audit. That meant that every time I did something well, it looked like, oh, Black women in senior leadership roles are really good. Every time I did something bad, it was like, oh, Black women in senior leadership roles in business are not good. And it just might be an issue of the fact that there are not enough of enough of us out there that you can really say, I've worked with really good ones, really bad ones, in the same way that we do women. That's my but yeah, I'm keen to hear what everyone else's view is.
Yes, please. Let's hear from the floor. What were your takeaways from this? I'm going to start pointing out at people.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, I've got to be careful because obviously my current boss is a woman. So, but like you, Refiwa, I mean, I've had. So if I look at my successes, actually for me, they've really been, I've blossomed under male leadership than actually female leadership, and I'm not necessarily referring to my current boss now, but I'm just talking about the previous sort of female leaders that I've had, and I think the one thing that I've observed is that female leaders, sometimes we tend to change to try and fit with the status quo.
Yes.
You you almost want, you know, I don't know, it's almost, CJ, I think you made mention of, you know, there's a comment when you're female, but you're exhibiting male characters as a leader, you know, that either people notice you more. But, you know, I've started following the Jacinda, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And you know, I think for many women, you know, we have to take some lessons from people like that, you know, and it's probably been part of an authentic person, yourself. But, you know, and the more comfortable you are with yourself, even when you get to certain leadership roles, you know, you probably lead better.
Yes.
You're an authentic person, so you lead better. And I think it also talks to people that probably are more servant leaders than having to be, you know, the leaders that are egotistical or whatever. So when you're a servant leader, you're more humane. You're in touch with the team better. You know. So yeah. So I think there's lessons that we definitely need to learn about ourselves and how to, where do we actually box ourselves? You know, to CJ's point, that in part of the box, you know, don't necessarily, you know, just being the true self is probably one of the greatest things that you can do in terms of boxing yourself, not boxing yourself in terms of doing other things, but just about you as a person. You know, I think for me, that's more that.
No, you're absolutely right, Letiho. I mean, we had an earlier conversation actually before we started about authenticity, you know, getting to when you're at executive now, you want to start almost emulating the men. So you're wearing your dark suits, your navy blue, your blacks, instead of being your authentic true self. So now, a couple of months after you started the role, you're starting to think, where did Rafika go, you know? Where did Letiho go? What happened to the lashes? What happened to the lipsticks and all of that? Because now, you are trying to be this person that you were not before. And it makes it hard then for people to relate to you because you're not being your true, authentic self. I have a question for somebody.
I think you've got two hands raised.
Oh, we have two hands raised. I can't see.
If I'm not mistaken, Portia raised a hand and someone else.
Okay, Portia, please take it away.
Thanks, Michaela. Thanks, Rafika. You're not going to see my face, unfortunately, but
That's
I'll
okay.
use my voice. So to the question of reporting into women, I've reported to a white woman, a black woman as an African woman, and I've reported to a range of men from local, white, African, Indian, etc., to overseas male leaders as well. So I've had a whole range. And I can say without a doubt that the toughest, but at the same time, the opportunity that it presented for me to grow was with the two women that I've reported into. That's great. Far in my career. Not necessarily in a positive way, by the way.
Oh,
so
okay. okay.
So the white female leader who was more like a man, she was the only one who was a woman amongst men in the leadership team. It was quite a big executive team. And she became more like a man, as in displaying a lot of male characteristics, becoming less of a woman or less feminine as such was my observation. In terms of personality, I'm not talking about outlook as such. And she was tough. She made people cry. That's how tough she was.
Sure. Cry.
The members actually, in a meeting should be so tough in challenging and pointing out your poor performance, if you like, that some people couldn't take it and would actually cry because she was that tough.
That's horrible.
But I actually grew from that experience because I chose to rather learn from it as opposed to looking at it negatively, even though it was a negative experience overall. And what I learned from there, which is what I got as feedback when I left the organization to join another, and she was still the leader when I left, is that she has seen somebody working very hard, that's me, by the way, working very hard and doing a lot in a very short period of time. So I left with a track record of doing a lot in a very short period of time because she pushed me to that point. the African female leader that I worked with was what we would typically refer to, if I may use the word, a bitch. But okay. I also chose to learn from her. And I've moved on to the next level after that experience as well. So I used her as a learning point to leverage my career to the next level because I learned to be tougher. And as a result, what I promote more than anything else is not only as women, but as an individual in a leadership role, you need to have the strength of character and you need to have that courage of conviction. And it talks to the leaning in that CJ was referring to earlier with regards to Sheryl Sandberg's book as well, the CEO of Facebook. So we need to be more confident as individuals, and even more so, obviously, with the challenges we face as women, to have that strength of character and to have the courage of conviction to say, no matter who you're reporting to, male, female, etc., personality types, that you believe in yourself so much that you still stand out regardless of the circumstances. Thanks, Rafili.
Oh, thank you, Portia. That was very good, very insightful. Sorry about the tough boss who made people cry. Megan has a hand up. Megan?
Good morning, ladies. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Megan Chauke Adonis. I'm a disability rights activist, visually impaired myself, a young female, and also a founder of an organization that advocates for women with disabilities. So on my side, I would like to find out how is it that we have created opportunity, equal opportunity for all women, including those with disabilities. I'm coming in whereby I can attest to the fact that opportunities are closed to women with disabilities, whereby you find women in leadership positions are not open to actually bringing on board or mentoring those women with disabilities. I don't know if the perception is that women with disabilities are mentally incapacitated. Incapable of performing certain acts and duties, but we find ourselves being ostracized and segregated by women, but yet we are the women who then support another woman who is fully abled. But when we then come on board and say, we need your mentorship, we need your advice, we need your assistance and your guidance, and also assist us to get to where we need to get to as well, to be obviously liberated and economic contributors, we find that doors get shut in our faces and we're turned back as though we are incapable of performing whatever duties that they may be. And also within the corporate space and the private, public, etc., are there opportunities that are equally created for women with disabilities to be able to enter into those spaces? Or are we saying that they should then look for opportunities that strictly cater to them? Yeah, that's my piece. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you for that, Megan. Certainly thought-provoking. CJ, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, Megan, I think you touch on a very, very pertinent issue. And I think, just as you were talking, I was just reflecting on the fact that, the spaces are already closed for many women. I can imagine how much harder it is for women with disabilities. And I don't have an answer for you, a comprehensive answer, but two things come to mind. The first is we need to have a conversation about disability at some point, and whether it's women with disabilities or in general. And Vic and I have had this conversation quite a bit, I think, around this assumption that if you're disabled, you are limited in your capability. And even if you look at the way in which BE is structured and a lot of training programs are structured for disability, it confines, it adds another box of its own. It confines disability to, or you can only do so much. And yet you can excel. So Megan, I do think this, and I'm putting this key to you, Vic, everyone, we probably have to have a conversation at some point to raise awareness about disability and the broad range of capability that a disabled person can still do. But just to make an input to Portia, I think maybe we need to have a conversation for women in senior leadership and in executive leadership. Because there may be certain things that we are doing subconsciously, so you maybe have had to fight quite a tough battle to make it. And you've had to put on this persona of being quite a tough, aggressive individual in order to even have your voice heard. And we are now translating that into the teams that we work in. And I don't know how much awareness there genuinely is and acceptance of the fact that, this is the felt experience of the people who work with women, because it certainly is quite disappointing to find that so many women have had negative experiences of working with women. And I can share my own journey. I know certainly when I first got into partnership at EY, I had so many things to prove. I had to prove myself. I always hear the example of one of the women that I worked with, and I think she would walk away and say, I'm glad I had such a negative experience of working with CJ, because I was extremely tough on her. I never stopped to listen. I didn't take excuses, because I was like, but you are letting the whole team down if you don't perform, and I've already fought this battle, and you can't let the whole team down. And it wasn't coming from a point of empathy at all. So I think we've got to have a broader conversation as the women who are in those roles. We do have a responsibility.
Yeah. No, thank you, CJ. I don't see any hands, but I do have a question for somebody who's joined, purely because she hasn't had a traditional career like I think most of us have here, finish university and then go on and get a job. So I think her experiences with her career may, shed a different light to what we've experienced, a lot of us. And that is Mpumi Nobiba. Mpumi, I think for you, just what has been your experience, because you are a speaker, you're an international speaker, and that's all you do. You go travel the world and you speak. So you don't have an experience of having a boss, reporting to somebody, or being part of an organization like a lot of us would have. So what has been your experience in terms of, the gender disparities that men and women face in the working world?
That's a very good question. I knew you were coming for me. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the conversation, CJ. I thought this was really, really empowering. As Fifi said, I actually come from very humble beginnings. I grew up in abject poverty, and my mother was one of 250,000 people who died due to the AIDS epidemic in early 2000. And I was afforded a scholarship at the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy. So I was part of the first class. And what that education gave me was a sense of agency. And I learned about the power of my own story as somebody who has been orphaned to an epidemic in a country and in a region in the world that is so stigmatized. And I began to share my story. And that opened the world in a way I could never imagine. I started speaking at about I was about 60 when I was sharing my story for the first time. And by the time I was 20, I had traveled pretty much across North America, getting scholarships. And then I started doing business in America and in Canada. And what I found is what I used to do strategically, because I knew that there's a value in existing corporations and organizations that I wanted to extract. And I also knew that I didn't know what I didn't know. And there were organizations based on what they were doing that I would identify certain capabilities and want to align with them. And so I'd usually come in as an ambassador. So this whole idea of taking what makes you special as a person, finding a way to brand it, and then using that as a entry point into different corporate and organizational spaces. And then from that place, negotiating partnerships or ambassadorships, because I never wanted to be fully employed, but I did want to gain from the organizations, and I also wanted an opportunity to build my experience. And I found that I've always felt like it's important for us to think out of the box. As somebody who was raised by a domestic worker, my grandmother was cleaning houses since she was 14 years old. And I always struggled to reconcile how the modern version of working is different to the domestic work that my grandmother would go and do. I mean, the white man she worked for all those years, Jimmy, didn't have a company logo or letterhead, but it felt the same process, you know, of generations later. Here she is in her 70s, and she really has nothing to show for all those decades. And I wondered how many of us go into the corporate environment with a thirst for a career. We get these roles and accolades, but what does that mean from a legacy standpoint? As a mother, I'm currently an expectant mother. I'm in my second trimester. I'm fighting sleep. As I'm speaking to you, that's why I went off screen, so I wouldn't doze off in front of everyone. But you know, there are essential questions as we pursue these roles. How much of our own legacies do we forfeit? Because is it enough for me to leave Old Mutual after 50 years and say, these are the roles I've done? I have nothing else that is tangible to pass on to my offspring. And so that's always been my edge. And I always felt like if I'm a validated human being as a young woman, I have a story I have overcome. And so I need to come into these places in as much as I'm humble. Of course, there is so much I don't know, but we're also equals from a standpoint of being creators and people who are coming into the world to offer something that has never been seen before. And so what I tend to find is working in spaces like North America. I mean, you would be surprised how people are just generally less apologetic of who they are. But it's always felt to me whenever I do come home that particularly our women and girls, we make an extra effort to make ourselves smaller, or to have to dim our lights, or to have to shrink ourselves, because that's the status quo. That's the structures that we've been sort of indoctrinated into. And I loved this presentation, and I wondered how much of us is looking towards, one of my favorite theorists is Buckminster Fuller. He is he's a futuristic theorist, and he would say, you know, to change existing systems, we have to take the energy that it takes to criticize and try to change existing systems and put it into creating new ones, and do that so well so that the current ones become obsolete. And that's the future I'm hungry for, a future where, you know, we are willing to trust ourselves and to support one another and as women, and see each other as equals, find our resources, and actually build new systems that aren't built on the strength of our backs and that don't pay to our legacy, you know. But I find that we can be way more less apologetic. I think our system is just designed that as a prerequisite to claiming our power, we need to ask for permission. And that's where I just struggle the most, because I believe that you are born innately worthy of that power. But many of us are not conscious of that. And so how much of our energy is actually going into edifying existing systems that weren't built for us with us in mind? And how can we redirect those energies into building new world orders that are actually for women and by women? I don't know how ambitious that is, but that's just the world I live in. And I hope that's the world my child will live in.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Mpumi.
I absolutely love that. Sure, there's so many elements. I absolutely love that. And I'm going to just touch on two things, Rafil, if you'll let me, just two things she mentioned that I think we've really got to think about and unpack. Again, there's not enough time in the world, but yeah. One is, I think, the power of our story and the power of representation of our story. I think, for me, the fact that, you know, you took your journey and you've put it on this global landscape, and you're saying, guys, I'm not apologizing for the route I want to take. I'm not apologizing for taking the road less taken. You know, I think that for me is incredibly powerful. If I can get my daughters to walk that journey for themselves, whatever that ends up being, that for me would be an achievement, because not all of us are meant to be in corporate. I don't think we need to be thinking about a different type of world. And I loved what you said at the end about, you know, we need to be less apologetic. And as you were saying it, I was thinking, a number of us, maybe let me speak for myself, let me use the I term. I find myself being very apologetic a lot of the times, you know, and I think I'm quite a force. But I find often I'm still making myself smaller to make the people in the room more comfortable. Because I often walk into rooms and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to be too much, going to be too overwhelming. And how do we make sure that more women, less women feel that? Yeah, anyway, that's, I mean, there's so many pieces that you talked about that I absolutely love, but yeah.
No, I mean, there's so many great things too. You know, this topic is really, I think we're all getting into it and there's a lot more to be said. And also on the chat box, I mean, there's so many great insights, you know, people have been saying some great stuff. But unfortunately, we don't have, you know, any more time. We have another session next week, Saturday on the 15th. We have another great speaker, you know, young, vibrant. So please do join us for that one. I do know that Vic would like to say one or two things before we close off. Just from my side, I really want to thank, you know, Vic and Valuate, you know, this event. We had this event because of Valuate. So let's thank them for that. You know, please go to the website www.valuate.co.za to find out more about what Valuate does, and also a few of the campaigns and events that are, you know, will be coming up this month. Please do check that out. We will be sending out a survey as well with just a few of the insights from CJ's presentation, but also looking at what everybody else has been saying on the chat box. So please expect that. And from my side, thank you, CJ, and thank you everybody else for taking the time off the Saturday morning to join us for this event. And please come again next week. Vic, please take it away.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to say, and it's literally going to be 1 minute to 30 seconds to say, you know, putting the male voice into this a little bit. CJ, I'm, you know, a little stunned, a little probably emotional, a little taken aback, because when you assume something as a man in terms of the understanding from a cognitive point of view of the experiences of other people, I think it's the same, you know, path that what's been taken with regards to the Black Lives Matter and seeing George Floyd. It took a while for people to realize that this is a story that's being sung for a very, very long time. And one of the reasons that is because we haven't listened. You know, you know, it's the first time in my life, and that's an indictment on me, because I assumed I knew, where I've just sat and listened, just paid attention to something that has been quite riveting and quite enlightening for me. And I think it means that we need to go away, particularly as men, and start reconsidering whether it is we know what it is that we think we know. Because I can tell you, the expression, the manner in which you've produced and conducted and presented what you presented today has really completely shifted my perspective of what I thought I knew. And I think that needs to be significantly more imparted to others. So I thank you for that. I thank you for doing that. And I certainly believe that we certainly need more of these. And as we say, it's not the last one. There's more next week. But it's one of the things that in Valuate we need to do, and make sure that young boys, young men sit down and listen, and not assume they know. So once again, thank you, CJ. Thank you for what you've done.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining. Enjoy the long weekend, and we look forward to seeing you soon again. Thank you very much.